For the last 3 decades, Knowledge Center at Bursa has offered technology, resources, services, space, and a sense of community. Since 1985, 14,000 titles have been collected, with care and attention to high financial literacy standards. In collaboration with a global community of institutions, we ensure access to the world's diverse intellectual and cultural economic heritage, as well as fast online services for connectivity to the financial world. Serving the Bursa Malaysia community and beyond, Knowledge Center at Bursa empowers you in your trading and investment analysis research.
Financial information at my fingertips.
Visit Knowledge Center at Bursa Malaysia today for the collections, for the services, for the sense of community.
You have suffered financial loss while investing, and you think your bank, broker, fund management company, unit trust management company, PRS provider or distributor, or their agent or representative is responsible. You need help sorting out the problem or want to seek redress. Where do you go? Sidrek is here to help you start the conversation and reach some resolution. First, lodge a formal complaint with a company that sold or offered you the unit trusts, shares, derivatives, or other capital market product or service. But you're not happy with their response. You have 180 days from their final written reply to come to Sidrek. Or if there's no written response, and it's been 90 days since you wrote to them, you don't need to wait longer. You may come to Sidrek even though you haven't received a final response yet. Sidrek first checks the eligibility of your claim. For example, is it within Sidrek's claim limit? Is it against a member of Sidrek? And so forth. If your case is eligible, we begin the dispute resolution process. All information in this process is confidential. We get both you and the member you're complaining against to sit with us and have a conversation. Documents and information will be required from both parties. No lawyers are allowed in the mediation process, as we keep the discussions informal and private. Our mediators are impartial and will hear both sides out and help parties communicate constructively towards resolving the dispute. 2 outcomes are possible at this stage. Either both you and the member agree to a settlement, or you don't. If the both of you agree to a settlement, an agreement is signed and the mediation process ends successfully. But if both you and the member fail to reach a satisfactory resolution, mediation has thus failed. But don't worry, Sidrek then proceeds to the next stage, adjudication. During adjudication, parties are given the chance to provide any further information to help their case and ask each other further questions. Our adjudicator will then study and consider all facts and information provided, including the conduct of the parties, laws, and best industry practices, as well as what's fair and reasonable. Sidrek's adjudicator will then make a final decision on the dispute and the monetary claim. If the decision is in your favor, it could be a full award or a partial award for your claim. But if the decision isn't in your favor, then no award will be made. You, the investor, will still have a choice. If you reject the decision, Sidrek will simply close the case and you may seek other legal avenues for redress. If you choose to accept the decision, however, the member has to comply with it. Once the parties have confirmed compliance to the decision, Sidrek will close the case. So let Sidrek help start the conversation towards resolution. For more information, visit sidrek.com.my or call 03 2282 2280.
Bursa Malaysia has been part of the Malaysian economic growth for over 4 decades. We have been working relentlessly to create a transparent, efficient, and vibrant stock exchange.
While we've been working at building a vibrant marketplace, inclusivity and contributing towards economic growth, we have also channeled efforts and resources towards supporting the community at large. Shares to Share is one such effort, which has been developed to create positive impact towards society and the environment. To put it simply, Shares to Share is a transparent and easily accessible facility that enables investors to donate their listed securities or proceeds from the sale of their listed securities towards charity through Yayasan Bursa Malaysia. You can donate odd lots or even board lots. The funds from the sale of these shares will be channeled to approved charitable organisations and their respective initiatives or projects.
Bursa Malaysia has waived its portion of the transfer fee, clearing and trading fees for all transactions that are conducted under Shares to Share. The participating brokers of Shares to Share have also agreed to waive their portion of the transfer fee and brokerage. The charitable organizations that have been selected have undergone the necessary due diligence process and have been duly approved by an independent selection committee.
At least 500,000 populations live with some kind of disability. They are most of the time being left behind. We need to empower them, otherwise they will continue to be the liability. A lot of human resources wasted from this group.
We provide a lot of support for persons with disability who are young adults and adults. We have a social enterprise called Project I'm Possible, where we managed to hire all persons with learning disability to work here. We have a cafe, bakery, weaving, and we have an art gallery.
Purity of thought, word, and deed, that is action, is very important to be really successful. We must know some skills to be able to help us then paperwork. The grant from Shares to Share will be used for, one is sewing, handicraft, classical dance, and so on.
Our patients have to be fed, they have to be looked after. We look out for any sort of disease they might develop, and also those unforeseen circumstances. Thanks to Bursa's initiative, we can be a little bit easy on our patients and their family members.
Donations will all be channeled to organizations that are involved in the sustainable development of Malaysia. The Shares to Share scheme offers you the chance to do so in a simple and effective way.
Bursa's Shares to Share allows us to do good by donating our shares to charities. Join us in making a difference to the society by donating your listed shares.
Shares to Share is open to all donors, individual as well as corporates or other types of entities. You can transfer your listed securities via Bursa Anywhere app at a click. For more information, please visit our Bursa Malaysia website.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar that's brought to you by Bursa Malaysia and managed by our company LifeChamp. Our webinar title today is Insights into the Crude Oil Market. My name is Shen Chu. I'm the moderator for this webinar. Now, crude oil is an essential commodity. They are widely used in many industries, okay, including manufacturing, transportation, petrochemical, and many more. And in times of escalating inflationary pressure, it is even more important for us to understand the crude oil market and watch the crude oil price movement. So today, our speaker is going to share with us the insights into the crude oil market so we can gain these insights and make informed investment decisions. As usual, disclaimer, Whatever we share in this webinar is only for educational purpose. So in no way that we give any recommendation for you to buy or sell any listed securities that we mentioned here. If you decide to make any investment decisions, you're 100% responsible for all the investment risk. Now, allow me to briefly introduce our speaker today. He is a full-time investor, author, and trainer. He has almost 30 years of investment experience in Bursa Malaysia and 14 years of investment experience in foreign markets, such as Hong Kong Exchange, Singapore Exchange, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, ASX, and London Stock Exchange. He is a best-selling author of Invest in Foreign Shares and Invest in REITs. He has also published 2 ebooks, which are Global Economic Collapse and 2023 Water Rabbit Year Chinese Astrology and Global Trends with Evelyn Tan. His area of expertise includes geoeconomics, geopolitics, and broad sectors in the resource industry and REITs. He has 8 years of experience in teaching retail investors in local stocks as well as global stocks. Academy-wise, he graduated from National University of Singapore in 1989. So he's none other than Mr. PC Wong. So PC, welcome to today's webinar. How are you today?
Thank you, Shane. Fine. A bit rainy though.
All right. So let me just hand over the session to you, yeah?
Yeah. So today we'll be looking at a few topics. That is introduction to the oil industry, and then we'll look at learn the global oil market outlook and learn the factors behind the oil price movement, and then understand the impact of geopolitics on Malaysia's oil industry. And this particular segment has become even more important given today's geopolitical conflict that is unfolding in the Middle East, as well as last year when Russia got sanctioned. And Russia, if you are still not aware, is a major producer and exporter of oil to the global market. So let's have a look at the global energy consumption. Now, this is a chart from Data, and you can see from the chart itself that Asia consumes the fastest growing demand for oil and other form of energy. This is because Asia population is fast growing, and when the population starts to grow, there will be demand for economic activities. And even though we live in a period where there's a lot of encouragement for people to go into renewables, one cannot deny that the most easily accessible form of energy are from 3 major sources. And in this chart, you can see that oil, gas, and coal account for 80% of the total global consumption. Now, other types of sources of energy is still very much lower. And in Asia, especially, some countries which are still in the development stage, they cannot easily transit to renewables because building up a renewable infrastructure would require a lot of funding, and not many countries can actually do it. It needs a very well thought of plan, a nationwide objective to transit into a renewable era. And because most of Asia's economy are still developing, the still easily available form of energy would come from these 3 sources. So if we want to look at, shrinking down the contribution of different type of energy, let's put it down to fossil fuel, renewables, as well as nuclear. Now, based on the data at the end of 2022, fossil fuel consists of 81.79% of total energy consumption, renewables at 14.21%, and nuclear at 3.99%. So fossil fuel still is the major source of energy for the world, although its share has dropped by 5.7 percentage points from 88.69% in 1990. So you can see that even though there's a very strong push towards renewables, the transition is not immediate, and it will be a very gradual affair. And it will be even more challenging moving forward as other developing countries or poor countries in the world are also expanding their population, especially in the South America continent and then the African continent. So the population from these two continents are also fast expanding. And because of that, the reliance on fossil fuel is still very prevalent, okay? Because most of these countries, they do not have that kind of infrastructure or even the funding to go into the higher end of the energy value chain, which is renewables and nuclear. So that is why, even though there's a pull and push factor in the whole energy cycle, that not all renewables will be able to overtake the fossil fuel consumption within a very short period. And that is why you see that it is very gradual. Now, renewables have gained 7.03 percentage point from 7.18% in 1990. And if we were to look at it on a percentage-wise basis, you can see that from 7.18% to 14.21%, that's a very exceptional growth. Okay, we are looking at 100% growth. So renewables is still growing, okay, and then nuclear share has dropped 1.95 percentage points from 5.94% in 1990. And of course, the major occurrence that happened was in 2011 when the Fukushima plant saw some damages which exposed its inner core and therefore resulted in a lot of countries worldwide putting an end to their nuclear power plants. But as things change right now, there is a revival for nuclear power because after a lot of the research being done, nuclear power plants right now are more stable, more safe than using previous technology. And there is an urgent need for some countries to move into the renewable energy sector because of the political pressure, such as in Europe, okay, and also in some parts of Asia. For example, China has set itself to achieve net zero carbon by 2060. So there's now a revival in nuclear power plants. But at the end of the day, however we look at it, all these renewable or nuclear plants still need a reference back to using oil for the mining of raw materials and also for the development of the infrastructure. So now, if we look at it, there's a correlation between oil consumption and GDP per capita. And from OECD, you can see that as long as there is ability to keep consuming oil, then there will be the GDP per capita will continue to trend quite closely. So that means that the GDP, how a GDP expand would depend on its economy. And here it shows that the consumption of oil is very central to all types of economic activities. So if we look at it in terms of construction equipment today still consume diesel, okay? We all over the world, we hardly have reached a stage whereby construction equipment are using the so-called batteries, okay? And even in the manufacturing sector, there's still need for oil, not only in terms of as an energy source, okay, but also oil in terms of the polymers, in terms of the chemicals that are being used in the manufacturing sector, and in the mining area, or in the resource recovery areas, oil is still being consumed because resource recovery is often very far away, and the only cheapest access to energy is still oil. Although lately there has been some interaction, okay, of going electrical in terms of underground mining and such, but it's still not covering the entire world, or it still have not reached a global stage. Most of the extraction of resources still consume oil. Now, if we look at it, there's a very close correlation between the oil price and the US inflation rate. Now, this is an example, okay? Now, oil price, when it reached a peak, then you see that not soon after, the US inflation also increased. Similarly, over here, okay, this was during the global financial crisis, where the Fed actually printed a lot of money, resulting in the devaluation of the US dollar. Because a lot of commodities are traded in US dollar, therefore a devaluation in the US dollar would push up the price of commodity, and oil being such, see a spike here, which then caused inflation pressure on the US market. And we see it again, okay, somewhere around 2020 to 2021, where the price of oil spiked, and then inflation actually shot directly in the same sequence. Often when oil price spike, then it takes a little bit of time before the CPI actually went up. And this is because the after effect of the rise in the price of oil takes time, okay, to have its impact being felt in the economy. That's why the CPI or inflation rate is often a laggard. Then we look at, in the case of Malaysia, again, we see that any spike in the oil price would often lead to higher inflation. But over here, the spike in oil price did not immediately result in an inflation, although right now we are seeing that it actually crashed up much later than what happened in 2008 during the global financial crisis. Now, this peak was during the Asia financial crisis, okay? And if we look at it, this time it takes a longer time for the CPI to be felt. And Subsequently, when the price of oil fall, then you see the CPI falling in tandem. Okay, so even for Malaysia case, there's a close correlation between the price of oil and Malaysia's inflation rate. So CPI is a laggard versus oil price. With oil price rising again in September and October, we could see resurgence in the inflation rate. So because this was up to around August, I believe that in September and October, especially right now with oil price hovering around 80 plus, versus the period in June and July where it was below 80, then we would likely see an uptick in Malaysia's inflation. And another factor that could drive Malaysia inflation higher is because of the weakness in the ringgit and in relation to the US dollar. So that is why when it is being converted back into ringgit, the price of goods becomes dearer. So let's look at the current landscape. Right now, we have conflict in the Middle East, and Lebanon, Syria, and Iran are likely the immediate targets. And this could be possibly related to BRICS and the petro yuan. For those who have been following the global news, just about 2 days ago, America or US have been airlifting 50 flights of military cargo as well as troops to its bases in the Middle East. And on top of that, we have dozens of US Navy ships now in the region with 2 battle carrier groups. And news journalists are already saying that this is the biggest build-up of military presence in the Middle East since the Iraq War in 2003. So although the press release from the US is stating that they are amassing all their military hardware in the region is as a deterrence so that no one would enter into the Israel and Palestine war or Hamas war. But if you think a little bit deeper, the US would not spend millions of dollars to airlift and send Navy ships into the Middle East if, let's say, there is no objective there. So very likely, I think Syria and Iran and Lebanon will be the targets because of changing geopolitics in the world. Effective from the 1st of January 2024, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and UAE would be joining the BRICS Plus. And together with the other countries like Argentina, Ethiopia, and the BRICS, there will be 11 countries in total. Out of that 11 countries, 6 of them are the world top oil producers. And together, collectively, they control almost 50% of the oil production. That means that when Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran becomes full-fledged member in BRICS by January 2024, they could have a wide influence on the price of oil. Especially most recently, you see that Saudi Arabia and Russia has been coordinating with each other to cut production to keep the price of oil high. Now, there's a reason for it. Saudi Arabia need oil to be close to $100 per barrel in order to maintain its subsidies for its population. And that is why when oil price was very low, you can see that they, together with Russia, Saudi Arabia, together with Russia, has been very actively promoting production cuts because they want the price of oil to move higher. Russia, for obvious reason, because of the sanctions, they need oil price to be higher so that they get more income from the oil trade. But the other thing also changed because last year, President Xi from China visited Middle East and he urged the GCC to consider trading oil using the Shanghai Futures benchmark, which trade in renminbi. So suddenly there is a shift from trading in US dollar to the petro yuan. And the US dollar is what gives the US the power to power to actually control the global oil trade. Not only that, because most of the trades are done in US dollar, not only in oil but in other commodities, it gives the US that kind of privilege to be able to continue printing US dollar to buy commodities. So that is why a lot of countries are very unhappy, because if they print their own money and start buying products using their own money, then you see that the US military will be knocking on their doors. And, you know, like Libya, Gaddafi actually wanted to promote the gold dinar as a form of trade with the whole African continent. Okay, and Iraq, Saddam Hussein wanted to trade oil outside of the US dollar, so they didn't end up very well. So that is how the US want to maintain its power, by using the US dollar as the denomination in global trade. But because of the rise of Russia and the rise of China, both also nuclear capable countries, they are now rejecting the US dollar, and they started a process called de-dollarization. So ultimately, it's all down to control of the global reserve currency, maintaining the US dollar as the global trade currency, as well as controlling the oil trade. So that is why right now, with the US facing a lot of financial difficulties at home, if you follow the US Treasury or their bonds, their yields have been spiking up. That means the value of the bonds has been deteriorating. So the cost of borrowing for the US government has been increasing, so much so, you know, that previously the interest payment on debt for the US government is less than the defense budget. Right now, it's more than the defense budget. And by next year, based on the existing debt that the US government has at 33.67 trillion, they will have to pay 1.68 trillion in just interest alone next year. So that's why, you know, they want to maintain the control, and inevitably, the only way that it can do so is to go into another war. So one of the main objectives is that if, let's say, Iran has been humbled, or in a way that is destroyed, like Iraq, then it will be a wake-up call for other countries which want to trade using the petro yuan. Okay, and once again, then the US dollar would hold relevance in the global trade. So if the war breaks out into the wider region, then we could see some serious problem across the commodity sector, not only in oil. Okay, but we'll talk a bit more later on how geopolitics influence the price of oil. So if, let's say, the conflict spread across the region, it could affect the global supply of oil. And Iran, which actually faces the kind of challenges, have warned repeatedly that should it ever come under attack, it would actually close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is where 20% of the global oil trade passes through. The worst case is similar to the oil embargo from the 1970s, which saw the price of oil surging almost 3 times. It happened during the 1970s, where after the Arab nations lost the war to Israel, they decided to have an oil embargo against the US and the Western nations, and subsequently saw the price of oil surging by almost 3 times. That was during the 1970s, which prompted Henry Kissinger to go to Saudi Arabia, negotiated, and then started the petrodollar. Now, as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia relies on the price of oil being close to $100 per barrel to sustain its subsidies. And Russia needs oil and gas to sustain its economy. More than that, Russia just announced that it will increase its military budget by 70% in 2024. And a potential recession that many economists are expecting will not impact so much the price of oil, because their response will always be more production cuts. Because right now, it has become a game of seeing who will outplay the other in the global geopolitical chessboard. So another situation that we now witness is the continuing war in Ukraine, which will not end until Ukraine becomes a landlocked country. Very difficult to negotiate for peace, because Ukraine says that there's no way they would negotiate for peace unless Russia return Crimea back to Ukraine, and Russia won't do that. So a lot of analysts are expecting that Russia will likely secure Odessa, creating a land bridge to Transnistria. Transnistria is a very narrow piece of land which has majority Russian-speaking citizens. So Russia oil and gas will remain sanctioned indefinitely, and when it is sanctioned indefinitely, means that a world number 2 producer and world number 1 exporter is being sidelined. So the US and Europe will switch to a war economy as production of military equipment and consumables is expedited, creating further demand for energy. Now, a war economy is not good for the overall growth of the economy. Why? Because it means pulling resources from elsewhere. When you pull resources from elsewhere, what it does, like consumer need goods, they need to consume goods. But if, let's say, the resources is pushed from the consumer side to the military side, that could only create a lack of goods, and therefore it will create inflation. So there's also a high rate of depletion in production from US shale oil and gas. Now, this one shows you the rig counts, which has fallen 20% year on year and 40% since 2019. So a lot of people are saying that US is the biggest producer of oil. Yes, but most of the oil they produce are actually shale oil. And shale oil actually have a very high depletion rate. As you can see from the chart here, from December 20 to December 19, crude oil has a depletion rate of 47%. And where the natural gas is concerned, that's a 32% depletion rate. So recently they discovered another basin that that push its production back up again. But then, people who track it is saying that by next year, there'll be another 40+% depletion again, because shale oil depletion rate is very, very high. It's around 40 to 50%. So it is not surprising. But one concern is that the rigs used in the US has fallen. That could mean a few things. One is that there are lesser fertile basin for them to extract oil, and that there also the cost of extraction has become more expensive to that extent that it's not commercial viable. So that is why you see the amount of rigs falling. So what does it mean? That because a lot of the oil is seeing high depletion rate, it means further down the line, there'll be less oil being produced. And that could actually lead to lesser oil in the market. Now, the other one is that China is stockpiling energy commodities. And this will also remove oil from the market. China also increased its coal import. China signed a 27-year gas deal with Qatar Energy in November 2022. So you can see that China imported record volumes of crude oil in the first half of 2023, up 12% year on year. Why is China stockpiling? Now, there are a few reasons. Number one is that the conflict in the Middle East, and if let's say it becomes wider and the Strait of Hormuz is closed, then there will be less shipment of oil available in the global market. So China, ever the forward thinker, more or less have anticipated a number of events. The other thing is that should a conflict in the Taiwan Strait happens, then there is a possibility that the Straits of Malacca could be blockaded, and therefore the shipment of oil from the from Middle East to China will be impacted. So to avoid China just want to, and that the world faces is that the SPR stocks. Now, SPR stocks is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the US, and that amount of stocks have declined by 40.2% since February 2022, and that is the lowest since the 1982. So the Biden admin recently announced that it will refill its stocks by about 6 million barrels at around $79 per barrel. But it will be very difficult. Right now, if let's say there's a wider military conflict, the US would be forced to refill its SPR at a faster rate. Now, that would actually create an extra demand for oil. And if you look at it, why oil price have declined since 2021 or 2022 for that matter. This is because if we look back at 2021, it is this is 2022, 2021. In fact, that's a gradual decline already. Now, why oil price decline was because when oil price hit more than $100 per barrel, the Biden admin started to release the stocks from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So because they release so much stock, then there's an overabundance of stock in the market, and that's why oil price comes down. Right now, they are already depleted to one of their lowest levels seen since the 1980s. So if they need to ramp back up their inventory, then they have to buy a lot more oil from the market. And it's something they have to do if, let's say, there is a military conflict in the Middle East. And because there's no more oil not enough oil to be released to flood the market, to bring the oil price down, therefore, we won't see oil price trending very steeply down like it did, okay, back to the 60s, 50s, or 60s like previously. And let's look at the future landscape of oil. This is seldom talked about, but a very prominent analyst called Steve Sanangelo has been one of the best advocates, okay, to warn people about the energy cliff. I'm sure a lot of you have seldom heard about the energy cliff. I have spoken about this in other webinars before, but basically what the energy cliff means is that it is the falling EROI, which is the energy return on investment. And right now, it costs more to produce a barrel of oil today than it did more than 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, 1 barrel of oil can be used to produce 100 barrels of oil. That was during the early 1900s, because energy, oil is in abundance, okay, at very, those near surface oil is so easily to extract. You just need to consume 1 barrel of oil to get the amount of energy, and then you can actually produce another 100 barrels of oil. But as the near surface oil starts to deplete, the producers have to go deeper inside the Earth's surface to extract oil. And currently, 1 barrel of oil can only produce 11 barrels of oil. Okay, so you can see that how such a big difference have occurred in just in a little bit about a century. Okay, somewhere around the middle. Okay, during the 1970s, it was 1 barrel of oil to produce 30 barrels, and right now 1 barrel of oil can only produce 11 barrels. Okay, so this is a kind of energy cliff that we experience. Now, what happens when 1 barrel of oil can only produce 2 barrels of oil? That means that it's very uneconomical and it becomes non-commercial viable unless the price of oil has to be very, very high. And that could mean that the energy cost to produce would increase tremendously, and it can only be matched by an even more higher price of oil to offset the higher cost of production. So even though the new technology is used to bring oil into the market, we are actually bringing oil production forward from future generations. Okay, so because our economy is so hungry for oil, and the sustainability has become very, very challenging. So we continue to spend aggressively to extract more oil, but all the while, economists are warning, we are actually abstracting oil from future generations. And therefore, in the future generations, they even have lesser oil for consumption. And the period from discovery to production has lengthened due to increasing difficulty in finding commercially viable oil. You can see that, previously it's very easy, you have a vertical pipe to extract oil, then they go into shale oil. Then right now they try to explore the Arctic oil. And I think BP and Shell have written off billions of dollars because they find that extraction of Arctic oil can be very challenging. And even finding the oil itself is so challenging because of the environment. So they have to actually write off, I think, billions of dollars of investment, and they are not going to pursue it anymore. So it is from the period that, oil is not like you sink a pipe into the, into the surface, and then, as long as you know that they have certain geology that meets the criteria, and once they sink it, they are able to find. Sometimes, yes, they can find, but then it may not be commercially viable because they will do a lot of tests, called logging tests and so forth. And then it might wind up that they are not able to produce a lot of barrels of oil. And if you look at a longer term perspective, then it might not be commercial viable at all. And the other reason is that even though countries are diversifying from using oil as an energy source, OPEC projects that global oil consumption will increase from 101.2 million barrels of oil per day in 2023 to 104.1 million barrels of oil per day by 2026. So there is still growth, even though there's a lot of talk of diversifying to other sources of energy. The current emphasis, to divert funding to the ESG economy further adds to the difficulty of oil companies to secure funding to explore and develop fossil fuel deposits. In fact, there's a lot of, in Europe, there is almost fanatical kind of agenda, on pursuing the ESG objectives. So much so that they say, even oil companies should start to diversify. And therefore, sometimes if you see Shell or BP, in their annual report, they also say they are diversifying, okay? In fact, Shell, a few years back, sold off 5 refineries globally, okay, to try to meet the ESG agenda. So even they themselves are going into like solar and wind power and such. So they are no longer the kind of so-called very focused on oil, but they've become diversified as an energy producer. But then, because of the lack of funding into exploration, then there will be even less opportunity to develop oil deposits. And then what we have is global supply imbalances due to wars and sanctions. And this could be very prominent in the coming years. The oil and the economy is intricately linked. Why? Because higher population will naturally consume more oil due to the need for economic activities. All economic activities are centered around energy, and the primary source of energy is oil. If there is not enough oil for consumption, then naturally economic activities will fall. Poor countries will be impoverished without oil. So here we can see that the global population estimates will continue to grow quite steeply during this period. Okay. And based on this, the global projection of population growth next 2 to 3 decades will exert tremendous pressure on global resources, especially oil, because this is the steepest growth pattern. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of the population growth, is seen in poor and developing countries. And therefore, they do not have that kind of funding, nor the kind of infrastructure to support renewable energy systems. And that is why they will exert a tremendous pressure to get the cheaper alternative, which is actually coal, oil, and gas. And with that kind of population growth and with the kind of current landscape and future landscape that we are experiencing, inevitably we will see that there will be a pressure to, to secure resources, especially oil resources. And JP Morgan actually came out with a chart to show the future needs as well as the depletion rate, how the oil production has declined. So based on CEOs of all oil companies, the rate of decline currently is measured at 8%. Now, if the 8% decline starts at 30 billion barrels in 2015, by 2016, it will fall to 27.6 billion, 2017, 25.4 billion, 2018 to 23.4 billion, and then all the way down to 2023, okay, we would be already at 50% of what was forecast in 2015. And 2014, it will drop to 14 billion barrels. So that means that this is the demand, but we are seeing decline in production. And when that is an imbalance between demand and supply, price will be the denominator. So if we look at a more detailed how the oil production has declined over a very long period of time, this is from 1965 to 2019, where oil production has gained 198.4%, but during the same period, oil depletion rate decline has gained 707%. So that means that this red bar here will continue to move up, even though that the oil production will continue to grow steadily, but this one will grow more steeply. And this chart shows you the gap between oil discovery and oil production due to underinvestment in oil exploration. For example, between the period of 2011 to 2021, global oil production was 320 billion barrels. But total oil discovery was just 76 billion barrels. So with the production so much ahead of the discovery, here we are looking at close to 4 times. Unless exploration picks up, then future production would actually be getting lesser because that's not enough deposits. And if we continue production at this kind of pace, then there will be a tremendous imbalance between demand and supply. And we are not talking about things that is going to happen in the next 1 decade or 2 decades. What we are experiencing here could happen over the next few years. And of course, a lot of people are saying that, hey, no need to worry, renewables will replace oil. Okay, here I'm going to debunk that narrative. First and foremost, renewables do not generate electricity 24/7 and 365. And in Germany, in 2019, wind energy went from supplying 59% to the grid on one day to as low as 2.6% on another, because you must have constant wind speed. If let's say on a particular day there's not enough wind speed, then you will see a sharp drop in decline. In the same year, solar peaked at 25% of the grid supply, but bottomed out at 0.3%, especially during certain period where it's very rainy or there's a lot of cloudy sky, then the efficiency of the solar panel actually drops. And the other thing is that solar farms are susceptible to periods of low solar activity or cloudy skies. Wind farms are susceptible to icing due to periods of cold weather, which could damage the wind blades and turbine. Solar panels and wind blades are not recycled, even though they say that, it's the ideal renewable and all those. And frankly, they are buried in graveyards. Okay, if you go to Google, you just type wind blades graveyard, there is a lot of pictures for you to see. And solar panels are also not recycled, even though right now there's a committee in China that's exploring how to recycle solar panels, because a lot of the solar panels would actually reach their expected lifespan of efficient energy production by 2028. So solar panels and wind blades and turbines need raw materials mined from the most challenging environments, far from any source of energy. The cheapest form of energy to mine these raw resources is oil, because no sane miner will build a solar farm to power the mine, to bring the mine to production. Okay, because developing a mine already costs tens of millions or even more than $100 million. And they will not actually build enough solar farm capacity that will cost tens of millions just to power the mine. Everything will be, will be back to using oil. So oil is essential for this operation. Now, the energy transition to renewables will require many more mines to be opened, increasing the environmental damage manifold. So a lot of people say, if you go into renewables, the environment could be safe. Actually, it's not true. Any extraction of resources is environmentally damaging, be it oil or minerals needed for the energy transition. And how many mines, okay, that is required to meet the global target of the energy transition in 2035? These are the kind of number of mines that is required to help the world achieve the energy transition. So all these mines would be consuming oil, okay? And therefore, sometimes when people talk about renewables, they do not have a deeper understanding about what it entails, okay? And not only that, when a lot of these mines are very damaging to the environment, and a lot of companies, when they finally end the mining life of the mine, they are also required to make good the land. And that itself, making good the land, also would consume energy, okay? So this is a very interesting post from energypost.eu and brought a very interesting point about the renewables. Total energy usage, the gross final consumption of energy, can be calculated by taking the production of energy in the EU 28 or Eurozone countries, adding the energy imports and subtracting the energy export. It can be concluded that the EU 28 currently uses about 1,800 millions of ton oil equivalent per year to maintain its prosperity. Incidentally, this number lacks the energy that is required to create the products, for example, in China, that are imported by the EU 28. So it's sometimes when you calculate, our economy just needs so much energy or million of ton oil equivalent per year, but then you do not take into consideration of the goods that are required but manufactured outside of the economy. Firstly, the conversion losses in the energy sector, like in power production, are not taken into account. Secondly, the usage of fuel oil for international shipping is not taken into account. And thirdly, energy consumption for feedstocks is also excluded. This works out to 1,100 million tons of oil equivalent per year. So that means that, for a 100% renewable energy, it will require a substantial 50% amount of fossil fuel to power the renewable energy. So that is why, when people talk about renewable energy is able to replace oil, not so fast, okay? Because all this is based on some calculations that are meant to feel good. So let's talk about supply and demand. Now, oil price movement are dictated by the following factors. Okay, as I mentioned, supply and demand. When demand is more than supply, price will be the determinant. Security of supply. Wars and sanctions will cause supply imbalances, such as what we are witnessing now, leading to some regions experiencing higher cost of energy, like in Europe, while others a lower cost, like India and China. An oil embargo will cause severe supply imbalances. Further production cuts by OPEC and Russia will reduce the supply of oil in the global market. And for the better part of 2022 to 2023, price of oil has been suppressed by the release of SPR stocks. There is little the Biden admin could do to suppress the price of oil further. Any attempt to refill the SPR will drive up the demand for oil. This will create competitive demand for oil. Explosive demand for oil due to geopolitical concerns, which encourage stockpiling among major nations, resulting in pulling supply out of the market. So here is an example where falling EROI results in higher cost of oil production, leading to higher cost of manufacturing and services. We use the US as an example because the US is the most indebted nation. Now, when the government spends more than it produces, then it will need to fund its consumption through debt. An increase in debt is an increase in inflation. And the eventual destruction of the US dollar due to unsustainable debt could cause oil price to skyrocket. So you can see that the debt actually has coincided with falling EROI. And that explains precisely that. So a country needs to have steady and sustainable source of energy. And once that sustainable source of energy starts to decline, the price of goods starts to increase. And when it increases to an extent that government needs to get involved, subsidize, and so forth, then the amount of subsidy would gradually increase as the cost of the goods continue to increase. So eventually, governments have to rely on that, and that could be very destructive on the economy. So let's look at geopolitics influence on oil. As I mentioned, a wider conflict in the Middle East could cause oil price to surge. A stark reminder that the oil embargo in the 1970s was targeted at nations that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. From 1st of January 2024, 6 nations will officially join BRICS. They are Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, making a total of 11 nations under the umbrella. Here are some interesting facts about the 11 nations. Collectively, they account for 47.6% of the world's total oil production. They also possess nearly half of the world's 1.6 trillion barrels of oil reserves at 719 billion. Of the 11 nations, 6 are the world's top 10 oil producers: Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Russia, China, and Brazil. Now, that gives the BRICS countries tremendous power to exert influence on how oil is traded and at what price. Enter the petro-yuan to challenge the petrodollar. Now, this is part of the de-dollarization project. The current conflict in the Middle East could be an attempt by the US-led nations to destabilize the region to protect the petrodollar, and Iran is an important land bridge in the BRI and INSTC. Now, I believe you know what is the BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, and the INSTC is the International North-South Transport Corridor. Oil from Iran will be shipped to Gwadar port in Pakistan and transported to China via the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, from the Gwadar port. In the INSTC, oil from Iran will be transported overland via Azerbaijan and Russia to Europe. If Iran collapses, then the BRI and INSTC will also collapse. However, should Iran be attacked, Iran could do something that it has always boasted it can do, to block the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the global oil trade passes through. Now, this is the CPEC, and the oil from Iran will be shipped by sea to Gwadar port, and then from Pakistan through the CPEC all the way to Xinjiang in China. So this is part of the BRI. And in the INSTC, Iran is here, okay, and Iran can easily ship the oil to India, and then going through Azerbaijan and Russia all the way to St. Petersburg, where it can be shipped to the other parts of Europe on a journey that is much shorter than going through the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Sea through the Strait of Gibraltar and then to Europe. So these two corridors are very important. Now, because of the de-dollarization project, it is in the interest of the US to stabilize the region to prop up the dollar. And this brings with it inflationary pressure to other economies, including Malaysia. Now, if the conflict spread across the region, the ensuing oil embargo or closure of the Strait of Hormuz could cause oil to skyrocket to much higher levels. Being a net exporter could benefit Malaysia oil industry, especially existing producers and oil and gas shipping companies. Now, during the last hike in towards the end of last year, when natural LNG actually went up very high in price, shipping for the LNG went up as high as $1 million per day. So if let's say we see similar hike, okay, those companies that are involved in shipping oil and LNG especially will benefit. It will also benefit biomass and biofuel companies, as they would be an alternative to oil, which will see very, very high price. So the other alternative is to go for something that could be cheaper. So that could actually help to balance the supply. But inflation will be very high due to higher costs of raw materials and manufacturing. So the government may have to increase subsidies for the population to offset the inflationary pressure. On the plus side, higher commodity prices could help the ringgit to strengthen as the dollar collapses due to the US unsustainable debt and rapidly declining economy. As I mentioned, you know, the US debt is really unsustainable. Now, just now I talked about the US government debt being at 33.67 trillion. But in actual fact, the entire US debt is around 97 trillion. And if we add that the US Medicaid and Social Security, which are all unfunded, total US debt, including corporate, household, etc., plus the Medicaid and Social Security is equivalent to 1,100% of the US GDP. So on a technical sense, the US is bankrupt. So that is why if they continue with printing more money, at some point in time, the US dollar will actually fall. And if let's say it falls steeply, then of course, the commodity price would be much higher, and being a net exporter of commodities could actually help strengthen the ringgit. So that's all I have. Let's go to the Q&A session.
All right, thank you so much, PC, for sharing with us the insights of the crude oil market. I guess the content today is very macro, where you talk about energy cliff, geopolitics, and what will influence the crude oil price and so on. So if you have any questions to ask our speaker today, you may write them at the Q&A box, not the chat box, so we can better manage your question. Wow, I got the first question, which is kind of big from Benji. So he's asking, what are the chances that the US will attack Iran given its strategic position?
I think it will not be immediate. If you look at the narrative coming out from the US in their White House briefing and all those, they are trying to blame Iran. They say that Hamas is Iran funded, and also the insurgents that are attacking US bases in Iraq and also in Syria are also financed by Iran. Okay, so they are actually drumming up support. Now, you have to think in a sense that the US would not spend so many millions of dollars to move all the military assets in the Middle East just to deter. A war is definitely on, is where. And the easiest one, of course, is against Lebanon and Syria. And of course, if it goes into Lebanon and Syria, then Iran would not stick around and find out, because after Lebanon and Syria, they know it's their turn. It's just like much what happened in Russia. Russia is not waiting to find out what will happen to the Donbass if, let's say, Ukraine take over the Donbass area. So it will actually becomes more embroiled with collective countries in the Middle East. How bad can it go? We can only hope that, you know, it will not last and last long, or that there will be a final solution. But I think the chances are, you know, just for example, maintaining the one aircraft carrier, okay, in a specific operation needs tens of millions of dollars per day. Okay, it's, you know, they wouldn't move two aircraft carrier. Right now, the amount of military there is consuming it at least maybe 100 over to a few $100 million a day. And they won't do it if, let's say, there's no specific reason. So let's hope for the best.
Yep. Yeah, well, let's hope for peace. The next question is by Paul. Where, moving forward, how does nuclear energy fit in?
Although there's right now a revival for nuclear energy, nuclear energy as a percentage of global energy consumption, as I show you in the chart just now, is very low. Building a nuclear plant is not cheap. It can cost between a few $billion to up to $10 billion, depending on the size. But there are talks right now that they would go into smaller nuclear reactors called small or modular reactors called SMRs that are specific target for certain for a specific industrial area. But it's still not going to overwhelm oil, because as I show you the chart just now, the biggest growth in population will be those from Africa and South America. And those countries are either poor or developing, and the thirst for energy is very high, and they do not have that kind of funding to go into nuclear. So the only viable source are actually the fossil fuel, which also include oil.
Okay. All right. The next question is by Casey. Will new liquefaction technology set to enter operation in the next 1 to 2 years change the model for new projects?
I think there will be all evolving technology, but the thing is that new technologies are not cheap. Okay, and like even if we talk about those poor countries, not all of them can afford LNG. They will still use coal or oil, because if you use LNG, there's a lot of processes, and any new technology that involve improvement of, let's say, energy efficiency would come at a price. And therefore, you know, on the countries that can afford it, then yes, they will benefit. But those countries that are not able to afford it, they will not be subsidized by the rich country either. Okay.
All right. So the follow-up question is, will interest in carbon capture and offset return to the liquefied natural gas market?
I think there's a lot of talk about carbon capture and things like that, but on the overall, if we want to refer back to the entire ESG agenda, okay, anything that is written about carbon and all those is to enable countries to set a guideline for countries to reach as near carbon zero as possible. Okay. And that is why there's a lot of talk about carbon capture and so forth. But ultimately, some industries, they will actually consume more carbon. And what they hope to achieve is to have a carbon exchange, whereby those that consume more will actually benefit those companies that are able to do carbon capture. And this is a kind of, although people say that it's good, but actually it is a so-called a stealth tax. Because recent studies, okay, by scientists who actually look at the world carbon and all those, they actually say that the carbon in the atmosphere, have not seen dramatic change at all. So this is again something that is thought of, okay, how to reduce carbon and so forth, because then it creates an exchange, and then from that exchange, people need to buy if they have if they consume too much carbon, and then in the process they make money from it. So if let's say the world carbon dioxide continue to reduce, then you have to ask yourself, where do we get the oxygen? Okay, because plants require carbon dioxide, okay, to generate oxygen. Okay, and if let's say the intention is to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then our future can be in a jeopardy. Hope that answers the question.
All right. So where do the LNG tanker charter rates go after a historically volatile 2022 and 2023? What is your
I
view?
think it has fallen very substantially, but recent data from Europe have shown that the energy cycle is going up again. The energy cost in Europe is on an up cycle. So a lot of things could happen if, let's say, there's an oil embargo. Assuming if it is something similar like the 1970s, then Europe would be in very difficult situation, and they would then have to buy energy no matter what, because the winter months are coming. Likely we see another spike. Normally for the energy transportation, towards the end of the year, the winter months, there will always be a spike. And right now also because the conflict in the Middle East, Libya has already said that it will sanction. Libya already said it will have an embargo against the US as well as Europe, because they are supporting the Israel regime, okay, in their genocide of Palestinians. So other countries in the Middle East may be pressured politically to do the same. So let's see how it goes.
All right. The next question is by Lily. How do you see that the period of yuan take over the position of US dollar for oil trade?
I think the intention is to get countries to trade in the renminbi so that it helps to internationalize the renminbi. But I think on a longer term plan, the idea is because China is exporting a lot of goods to a lot of countries. Let's say, in a sense that China is involved with Saudi Arabia by selling its goods to Saudi Arabia. It is also helping Saudi Arabia develop its infrastructure. And China buys oil from Saudi Arabia. So rather than going through a medium of US dollar, if let's say the trade is done in renminbi, Saudi pays Saudi Arabia in renminbi, and that renminbi is held in that account. And whatever China sells to Saudi Arabia or do infrastructure from for Saudi Arabia, then that amount will be reduced accordingly. But a lot of people do not realize that in the actual sense, the renminbi is actually backed by gold. Okay, at the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the renminbi can be converted into gold at any time. So that is why there's a lot of talk that eventually the BRICS will actually move back towards a gold settlement. There's not going to be any BRICS currency, but probably there will be a gold-backed trade among BRICS nations by using the renminbi. And another development is that Russia has developed a tokenized gold, okay, which are using blockchain. So you can if you look at like recent data has shown that a lot of the BRICS nations are actually buying a lot of gold, and including Southeast Asian nations such as Thailand and Singapore. And why does the purchases of gold have increased so much by central banks over the last few years? The central banks definitely know something is going to happen. And for that, they know that whatever transition that happens, gold would actually be the best reserves to be held. Okay, not US Treasury, because if the US dollar falls, like right now, any central banks that hold US Treasury would easily see that their reserves are depleted in value by 30 or 40%. Okay, so hope that's answered your question.
Thank you so much, PC. The next question is by Ching. So based on your sharing, it seems that the supply of oil and gas will go down, so the price of oil and gas will be higher. All right. So what will the impact on us in Malaysia, since we are an exporter of oil? So that's her question.
Okay, first and foremost, between oil and gas will be more volatile. Okay, gas has always been volatile because its demand always spike during the winter months, but oil is more widely used across the globe in all types of economic activities, because oil is not only as a source of energy, oil is used in petrochemical, okay, in fertilizer, okay, in other chemicals as well, and also in polymers. So therefore, oil would actually has a wider application rather than gas. Gas is actually to power up the gas firing plants, okay, to generate electricity. But oil has a very wide use. So that is why if let's say oil falls, okay, demand for fertilizer, demand for polymers in the economy will not fall. Rather, because of population growth, there'll be even higher demand. Okay, so that is why oil fall would have a very wide implication across a variety of industries. So when Malaysia is concerned, okay, those industries that uses oil to create products, then of course the cost will be higher. But for those who actually export oil from the refinery, okay, and also as chemical products deriving from oil, then those would do much better. But if you are a manufacturer that requires polymers to produce a finished goods, then of course that manufacturer production cost would actually go up. So it doesn't mean that oil would benefit all industries. Only those specific industries, for example, producers, those that are in the shipping, those that actually produce chemicals out of oil, refine oil, those would do well. But those that require oil to do a finished product, that is that those would actually pay a higher cost. But overall, if Malaysia is a net exporter, then Malaysia could benefit, because if the price of oil skyrocket, it has to come with a depreciation in the US dollar, which I mentioned just now, because of the huge budget deficit, the huge unsustainable debt. It will happen to the US dollar. Okay, right now the US dollar is the cleanest shirt in the dump. Okay, if you look at it, measure the other currencies in gold, then you see that yen has reached the highest price for gold. Australia as well, if I'm not wrong, Canada as well. A lot of countries are seeing record high prices for gold. Why? Because their currency has depreciated against the US dollar. Now the thing is that how long can the Fed maintain such a high interest rate without causing the US to default on its debt eventually? Because by next year, it has to pay 1.68 trillion for its existing debt. But this existing debt will continue to grow. That means by 2024, they could be paying more than 2 trillion if, let's say, interest rate remains the same. And when the US tax revenue is 4.6 trillion, at 2 trillion interest payment on debt, that is easily almost 50%. And that's why it's not sustainable. So that's why the Fed eventually have to slash interest rate. Okay, they might have to do QE to bail out all the banks, which are underwater, a lot of them, even though a lot of banks say they beat earnings and all those in the US, but they never report their unrealized losses, because the losses that they hold US bonds is not marked to market. They just put under one column called unrealized losses. So eventually the banks will bail out, and even they have to do a lot of QE, because that's the only way to save the US financial system. But if, let's say, they do that, then the US dollar would fall very steeply. Now, the last time it happened during 2008, the DXY index fell to 69. Right now it's 106. So if, let's say, they start slashing the interest rate, then the DXY would actually fall, and that could actually help strengthen the Malaysian ringgit. And hopefully, if, let's say, the commodities and oil are doing well, the ringgit strengthen against the US dollar, then maybe we'll see inflation in Malaysia may be reduced, but it won't be reduced to a great extent. Why? Because a lot of economic activities center around oil. That will still be some inflation. Okay.
All right. Looks like we have overrun the session by a little bit. So let's do one last question by Janet briefly. So the 1973 oil embargo led to a bear market for 2 years in the equities market. So what could investors do if another embargo happens? Would any sector benefit?
If, let's say, there is an oil embargo, then definitely those that are related to the oil industry would benefit. Okay, because it naturally reflects higher price of oil, and energy alternatives will also have some benefit, because they will, people will look at other alternatives beside oil, but as long as they also are a provider of energy source. Then, of course, during the last the oil embargo in the 1970s, the price of gold went up from $35 to $825 by 1980, over a 10-year decade. So in that sense, gold is a hedge against all these uncertainties, against all these geopolitical tension and such. So Bursa actually have a gold ETF. I think those who have been following me for quite some years, I've often mentioned, buying the gold ETF, from the times that when it's about 140 or 50 ringgit per gram, and right now it's already 300 over per gram. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, BC, for doing this webinar for us, insights into the crude oil market. So ladies and gentlemen, you just heard from the full-time investor, trade and also author, Mr. PC Wong.